On November 4, 2010, at a public hearing before the Blaine City Planning Commission, the Grandis Pond LLC development team presented details on the Grandis Pond PUD and preliminary plat application. The following is a video of that presentation.
Mr. Chairperson, members of the Planning Commission, I'm Steve Price. I'm the project manager for Grandis Pond. And before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge, if I could, Ken Shore. Ken is one of the partners in Grandis Pond LLC, along with Ken Hertz, who cannot be here tonight. In addition, I'd like to introduce the other staff members that you'll hear as part of our presentation. Dave Christensen, our architect and master planner, Craig Parkinson, Cascade Engineering Group, and Mike Despino, Cascade Engineering Group. Before we get started, though, I'd like to take a few minutes and kind of set the scene for you as to what has transpired in this project. I'm sure you've heard something was coming down the road for some time. Well, the Kens, we call them, Ken Hertz and Ken Shore, they purchased this property, or they started looking at this property in 2004. The property was purchased in 2005, and then we started what has been a fairly intensive and exhaustive planning process, a 2-year planning process that I have to say included a number of community meetings out in the community with the public, with potential knowledgeable individuals about the market, about the project idea. And I cannot tell you the innumerable meetings with city staff during this 2-year period, both the planning staff and the public works staff. After that planning process, we were finally able to submit the PUD application and the preliminary plat application in the spring of 2007. The box there contains 5 3-ring binders. That's the PUD application in its totality. And you're going to hear a little bit about it tonight in our presentation. We received the notice of application completeness in the summer of 2007. In the late fall of that year, as the process of review started with the city, it was determined that we would have to put that review on hold while the city addressed the issue of East Blaine infrastructure and how and what type and in what place and then how would it be paid for. So the review process was put on hold at that time until October of last year, 2009. So a year and a half as we went through the infrastructure planning process with the city. In late fall, shortly after that document was adopted, in late fall, the staff suggested that we fund, because of staff difficulty, shortage, and amount of time available, that we fund an outside review of our SEPA checklist, which we agreed to and did. That took about 5 months, and it resulted in an MDNS being issued in the summer of, in June of 2010, with a revised MDNS. We made changes to the first one, and it was resubmitted by the city as a revised MDNS, and that also was approved and issued later in the summer. So it's been through 2 SEPA reviews, or 2 MDNS processes. So here we are, 5.5 years after the applicants purchased the property, 3 years after we submitted the PUD application, and during that time I must add that we have worked with 2 different community development directors, 3 different project planners, and 3 different assistant public works directors. And they have all been terrific, and they've all been really helpful. So we've had a lot of eyes on this project from the city side of the table. So we're here tonight to tell you about our project in a little bit more detail, because it is a big one. It is exciting. It's got a lot of different nuances to it, and I think that you're going to be pleased with it. We'd like to take about an hour of your time. I know that we're really pushing the limit there, but we are trying to condense all that into something that you can visualize. And so we'll just start by walking you through it, and Dave, you can jump in and start that process.
Okay, we have visuals. My name is Dave Christensen. I'm an architect planner here in Whatcom County, Bellingham. You know, today I was reading a trade journal, and they were interviewing, they built a new Benedictine monastery in Madison, Wisconsin, and it received the highest platinum LEED points of any project in the nation by the U.S. Green Building Council. And the reporter asked them, you know, how did you do this? What, were you trying to get the most points in the country? And the sister who was interviewing said, we weren't trying to do the in thing. We were just trying to do the right thing. And this has been a guiding principle for all of our team on this project, is trying to do the right thing. Well, I'm not going to go through a lot of things that Michael already talked about where this property is. This 440 acres on East Blaine, right against the east property line. This 440 acres here has 150 acres of wetlands on this property, so it's an interesting challenge to deal with. As we were looking at this property, we're trying to see, what can you do with this piece of property? Can you do agriculture on it? Well, it's been farmed multiple times, or it's been logged several times, so that doesn't any logging value there. Can it be farmed? Well, with all the wetlands on the property, the topography, farming didn't seem like a good option. So the zoning at PRD, next slide, seemed to make sense. Now, this property is vested for 80 lots, 5-acre lots. Now, originally, there was 22 lots on this property. So you can imagine if there was 22 individual property owners doing disjointed and separate properties and development on here, it wouldn't be very coordinated. And so here's an opportunity here. So what happens is with the 5 acres lots that is vested on this property, each property owner is allowed to fill 1/4 acre of wetland. So that means they could be 20 acres of wetland filled on this property. So the question is that the right thing to do here? It's certainly the easiest thing, but it may not be the right thing. This is in the city limits. This is where growth should happen. Or, of course, there's, sprawl development. We don't really want that either. So we want some mix in between. Next slide. This shows, of course, is an extreme example. We don't want filling of wetlands. We want to preserve the environment as much as possible. Next slide. Now, we want to meet the goals that the city's established for planned unit developments for the planned residential area here, and a lot of those are traditional neighborhood developments and smart growth strategies. A lot of these principles enhance quality of life, promote economic development, create livable communities, promote alternative transportation, create a range of housing opportunities, and preserve open space, natural resources, and the environment. If you've heard the term triple bottom line, you have to be equal on economics, social, and environment. No one can dominate over the other. They all have to be very important, and this is what we want to try to achieve here. So the owners, both Kens, were traveling around the country and trying to figure out what is the vision, what is the thing we want to do on this property. They wanted to meet the goals of smart growth strategies that we discussed, with environmental stewardship in a master plan that better controls stormwater, affordable housing, development options with open space, connectivity, and positive economic impacts for the citizens of Blaine. All right, so what we're going to talk about here is what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and how did we try to solve this? So, next slide. So one of the first challenges, of course, is the wetlands, the critical areas and the buffers on this property. Next. The Canadian border. That's something to deal with, and we want to know what's involved with that in meeting with Homeland Security. Next. As Michael discussed here, water and sewer access to the property. Even though it's in the city limits, then the East Blaine plan will help solve that, but that is a critical issue that we have to discuss. Next. The aquifer, we want absolutely to preserve and protect the existing aquifer that's south of H Street. And of course, we want to meet the principles of smart growth and to prevent sprawl. And the urban growth requires 4 units per acre as a minimum on the site. And we do not want this kind of development. We want something that integrates well with the city of Blaine and the environment. One important thing here is the demographic trends here. And something I want to talk about very briefly here that's going to kind of, I don't know if this is going to surprise you or not, but it kind of surprised me that Builder Magazine contracted with several demographic studies. And I'm going to read you something here about what's happening right now. The U.S. will continue to grow with another 100 million people in America by 2040. 85% of net household growth will consist of childless households. Households without children are the largest group even now, comprising nearly 70% of the total. A subset of that number, married couples without children, stands at about 28%. Now, in spite of the current economy, these are kind of national trends here. The number of households made up of married couples with children is only 21%. The group born between the years 81 and 99 is poised to change the face of housing in this country. There will be more first-time home buyers in this market in 2013 and 2018 than ever before. In 1978, 60% of college graduates were men. Today, the reverse is true. Women are now the majority in the workforce. Minorities will be the new majority in the United States. The most important factors when choosing a new home showed that 9 of the top 15 are what might be considered green concerns. 3 include energy savings, indoor air quality, and pedestrian-friendly locations. So take into account decreasing household sizes when designing new homes. Know that suburbs are still very important no matter what the new urbanists say, but they need to be reconfigured. And the most critical imperative, of course, is we have to try to figure out what women want, but maybe I should say that. That was right in the study. But anyway, that is important issues, that things are changing, and we want to try to meet those goals and the demographic trends of the changing marketplace that's going to happen, and want to plan for change. Next slide. The one thing we did is had a lot of community interaction. And so what we did was we had community design charrettes, where we listened to consultants, neighbors, realtors, planners, engineers, city staff, trying to get input. We came in with a blank slate, wanting to know what is the right thing to do on this property. We had environmentalists, we had habitat studies. We were trying to figure out, what does the market want? What will it want in the future? Next slide. So, what is the development concept here? The Blaine Municipal Code guidance led to the development of the Grandis Pond Master Plan based on the following key principles. 1, sensitivity to the environment and the on-site critical areas is a priority. What's shown here is the dark green is the wetlands, 150 acres, and an additional buffer that varies around the rest of the property. So all those areas aren't able to develop, so it's going to be an interesting challenge. Second thing is we want to utilize low-impact development strategies and aggressively implement them. Some of you people on the Planning Commission saw a presentation a month or 2 ago with Chris Webb, talked about a lot of those low-impact development strategies that we're utilizing. And we've talked with Public Works about them a lot too. So how are these important developments and opportunities and challenges met? So here's some of these guidance on impacts. At the Canadian border, when we met with the Border Commission 2 or 3 times actually, the rules are the Border Commission has a 10-foot or 3-meter separation required. You can't be within 10 feet of the border. Nothing can be there, as you know from a retaining wall issue a while back. From there, they preferred, there's really no rules beyond that. That's all, the only rule there is. And of course, if you talk to people who are on the Mexican border, they want, a 20-foot high wall there, and they want cameras and roads and all kinds of things, but they preferred that backyards weren't right up against the fence there. And so what we did is we planned anything that's around the road. There's only like 4 or 5% of the properties against the border, but when there was, we wanted the road on that side so that the house property is at least 50 feet away from the border. So we had it as far away as possible. Next slide. The other issue is, of course, on the open space. We have 229 acres. Over half of this property is extensive recreation trails, parks, and preserved open space and environmentally sensitive areas. We want to make sure we preserve the assets of this site. It's what people like. Now I'd like to go into some of the details and the metrics of the site, and Craig Parkinson can talk a little bit about that, and I'll come back and talk about how all this comes together. Craig?
Hi, I'm Craig Parkinson. I'm a civil engineer. I've been working in Whatcom County for about 25 years on land development projects. And the first few months of this project, David described as being the defining the owner's vision and getting input from the stakeholders on what they'd like to see. Then after that, the engineers got to roll up our sleeves and look at what's really on the ground and what do we have to, how do we implement all this. This slide here is out of sheet 16 of the PUD drawings. It shows the wetlands. Like Dave said, there's 150 acres of wetlands. The first thing we did was have a thorough delineation done the Department of Ecology came out and field verified the delineation with our wetlands consultant, and so we're pretty confident that that's the extent of it. John, next slide. This shows the development overlain with the wetlands, and what I'd like to show here is this is sheet 17 out of the PUD package. There's the impact areas are in red, and it's important to note we're proposing to fill less than a half acre of wetland on a 438 acre site that has 150 acres of wetland on it, and in my 25 years that's extraordinary. That truly is. None of the lots are impacting wetlands. Really, the only place we're impacting are on the road corridors, and I think there's a little one up here as well, but they're mostly on this main thoroughfare that goes through the site. And again, I'll reiterate, and Dave mentioned, without a master plan and doing a larger project like this, you'd have 80 pieces of property that could each fill a half acre of wetland, and you'd have 50, 100 times more wetland fill. Next slide, please. Mitigation will be easy to accommodate. The purple areas are areas that we identified as potential mitigation sites. So we're confident we can easily mitigate this. Michael mentioned that the SEPA review had comments in it, and it certainly did. The Department of Ecology made note that they were concerned about the buffers. The buffers for the wetlands were based on the 2005 Critical Areas Ordinance. Next slide. And so we looked at the 2007 ordinance, and we looked at the project to look at what could we do differently and make this project better. So this is the whole Grandis Pond project, and these two slides are a blow up of this area. This was the original submittal that was submitted in 2006. This is what it is today. So we looked at expanding buffers and also taking some of the lot areas out of being lots and dedicating upland area as additional buffer and adjacent upland to the wetlands to improve habitat and wildlife corridors. Next slide. Down here in the commercial area, this one isn't quite as obvious, but you can see there's a lot more green, a lot more connectivity for wildlife in this area. Next, please. And over on the east end of the site, we've got quite a bit more green area in here, and that will all be preserved. And one more, up to the northwest of Grandis Pond proper. This is a gorgeous piece of property in here, and we thought this would be a nice open space park area, so we've taken this out of being for lots and are looking at having a park in that area. At this time, I think I'll have Mike Despino come up. He's going to talk about some of the other elements that we as the engineers took a peek at. Mike?
Thanks, Greg. Good evening. My name is Mike Despino. I'm a civil engineer with Cascade Engineering Group. I've been a civil engineer for about 30 years. The last 14 have been here in Whatcom County. As Michael talked about in the SEPA checklist, there's a couple of critical issues, and really they're just the hot button issues. Craig talked about one, the wetlands, environmental. I'm going to talk about a couple more, and the first one I'd like to talk about is the regional aquifer. So the city has done a number of studies on these aquifers and the amount of water you can pull out of the wells. There's 4 major aquifer studies that were done with part of the East Blaine annexation, 2 by consultants and 2 the city did as a response to that. And then in 2008, they just completed another one of these studies. And basically, the studies come out and they say, what are some of the things that we need to be concerned about for protecting this thing? And it all comes down to usage. So some of the critical usages are agriculture. So if we have agriculture out there, we've got pesticides, we've got fertilizers we have to deal with. Quarries. We got quarries, especially the ones that are mining below the water table. They can have an effect. Commercial, industrial areas. What are the pollutants, surface water pollutants associated with those kind of industries and operations? Highways. You get pollutants from oils and brake pads all go on the roads. And then residential communities, what happens there? You have roads, so you have the same as the highways, but also you've got an increase in impervious surface. What happens then? So these are some of the things that we need to talk about. So next slide, please. As Michael pointed out, this is kind of a regional map. This is the, here we go. This is the city's watershed, and then right up here is the Grandis site. Please, John. This is a blow-up of the area. Again, the watershed, Grandis site. These are different wells that were used in the studies to check and monitor where the water was going. This green line here is a cross-section that we're going to show in the next slide. Shows you what the site looks like. So Grandis sits up on the top of the hill that's here. And there's 3 aquifer layers. There's a perched aquifer layer, sits on the top. There's this shallow aquifer system. And this is where most of the homeowners that have deep wells, they're pulling water from here. The city gets all their well water from here, except for 2 wells, which they have down here in this deep aquifer system. These are about 500-600 feet down there. There's about a 400-foot separation here of an aquitard, so that the water from the top here doesn't really come down and get down into the deep wells. The next one, please, John. So in the study, it shows you this is a grade break of where the water flows, the red being the Grandis site, and the water on the north side of this is a groundwater movement in the shallow aquifer. Everything north flows into Canada, and everything south comes down towards the well field and then works its way towards the bay. So it's just in this area, the southern part of the Grandis site is actually in this area. The next one, please. So what the city has done is they said, okay, in their groundwater protection plan, they've identified certain circles. This is the 1-year distance it takes for the groundwater to move. Okay? This is the 5-year and the 10-year. Again, the concern is just with that shallow aquifer layer, because it takes about 240 years for the water to make it down to that deep aquifer. And that movement is kind of northeast to southwest, comes through Canada. So the city says, okay, we need to protect these areas. Again, just the lowest portion of the Grandis site is in there. So as part of our aquifer study, we hired geoengineers. Geoengineers is one of the largest, one of the most renowned geotechnical engineering firms in Washington State and actually in the West Coast. And they had a certain series of recommendations that we do. And the first recommendation is to capture as much of this water as we can and infiltrate it. Treat it and infiltrate it. That'll keep the water going back to the aquifer. Second one is control the amount of usage that's in there. So watch your industrial type sites, watch your quarries, your agricultural. Use LID techniques for low impact development techniques for when you build. Okay? And these are the type of things that we're going to be working on. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about the stormwater. So the stormwater and groundwater, they kind of work together, but because we have those aquitards between, they actually function a little bit differently. This is a topographical map of the site. So each one of these things is a contour line. And there's basically 2 ridges in the site. There's one right here. You can see these blue ones are flow arrows. You see how they're going different ways? There's a ridge that's about here, and then there's another one that runs right about here. So about 1/3 or 2/3 of the site, the central part of the site, all drains into the Grandis Pond wetland, and then it flows north into this creek and then out of the site. Water over here kind of works its way to the north, runs along this way, it ties into this system. So really you're only left with a very small, about 1/3 of the site where the stormwater actually moves off, comes this way. When we looked at the site, the way we planned on developing it, there are about 17 basins that we have in the site, 17 different areas that where the water go and how is it tied with development. The next one, please. The groundwater studies say, let's infiltrate the water. This is a map of the different types of soil that's below the site. The purple and the goldish here are types, they're called A and B soils. They mean that they have a good ability to infiltrate. A is the highest, it can infiltrate very well. Think of sands and gravels. B's maybe like a sandy loam. When you get down to the C's and the D's, these blues and these darker greens, they're what we call tight soils. They don't allow infiltration very well. You can see about 70% of the site where we're developing these gold and these purples, we can infiltrate the water. And that's what we're planning on doing. Look at the areas where you see the blues. These are also the areas where the wetlands show up. They can't infiltrate, the water stays there, and it develops wetlands. Okay, the next one, please. Dave mentioned that this is going to be a very low impact development driven community. Well, what does that mean? Well, for starters, when you reduce the road width, you reduce the amount of impervious area. More water can hit vegetation and it can infiltrate. Other things that we're going to do is, over here, we're going to have small local infiltration and treatment facilities as opposed to these large regional facilities. And we do that by collecting the runoff from the roads and having these roadside infiltration areas. They call rain gardens. Here's a picture of a couple. The water runs right off the road and it comes into these things. They're treated by the type of vegetation and it infiltrates. And then finally, in these areas, if we have cul-de-sacs, we'll try to put, instead of just paving the inside, you put in a vegetated area there. Okay? I'm going to give you just some specific examples. We talk about this collector road that runs down the middle of the site. What we're going to do is, instead of having a crown road, we're going to slant the road so the water sheet flows this way and then this way into this area here. And this is a rain garden. So what a rain garden is, you pick your vegetation that can cover it, low maintenance type of things, covers the ground. This is amended soils if we need it. We let that filters out some of the sediment and the leaves and the vegetation captures, say, the oils, the other things, and then just comes right out the bottom and it infiltrates. If we get into an area where we have these tight soils that can infiltrate, we'll put an underdrain system in it. These are some examples of what these look like. The water just kind of follows the curb line, in this case, comes through, goes into this little valley and it's treated. Another one is here, another one there. Basically, it looks like landscaping. And they're very effective and not a lot of maintenance. Next one, please. On the local roads, we're constrained by the amount of right-of-way that we have. So what we're planning on doing here is slanting the road again this way, and in the parking areas, we're going to have pervious pavement, typically a pervious concrete. When you pervious concrete, you pour the water in, it just goes right through. Same kind of feature here. Comes across, and these things actually act as a treatment mechanism too. When you build them with a sand layer, goes through, that sand captures the harmful stuff, keeps it in there, and then over time the microorganisms in the sand break down the oils and the other things. And then finally, the next one please, on the lots themselves, if we capture the roof runoff and infiltrate that where we can, again, we're getting more water back into the ground, we're helping the aquifers. Now, before we had these narrower streets, and you kind of wonder, what are we going to do about the parking? Well, the way we set back these homes, and Dave will talk about this later, we set the homes back, we have the cars park in the driveways. You see the number of homes cars that can be stacked here. And then when we do that, we have these type of mechanisms here, where we just have the paved strips where the tires are, and we leave the grass there. For the roof runoff, we capture the roof runoff here, and we route it down into a system. From the top, all you'll see maybe is a catch basin lid or something like that, but underground, the water comes through, it's captured in this area, stored up, and then it infiltrates down. Low impact development techniques that are very effective. Okay, next one please. And then finally, in the areas where we can infiltrate, where we have these tight soils, we're going to go to a conventional system. We capture the water, catch basins and pipes, and we route them through detention ponds and treatment ponds. Because we have 17 basins and we wanted to make sure our bases were covered, what we did was we said, all right, assuming we can't infiltrate any stormwater at all, what do? Well, we'll size these ponds. So each basin has these ponds and these blue areas in here. If we can infiltrate the runoff, the pond goes away. It can be open space, it can be more lots. We'll worry about that. But what we'll do is individual geotech before we start to build, and then we'll see if we need these or not. So we try to infiltrate, we do low impact development, and when we can't, we'll go to a conventional system. And then these all discharge into the wetlands. So the natural direction is for them to go to that wetlands, and this way we'll maintain the hydrology in the wetlands. Okay, thank you. Next one, please. Traffic is another hot button that we have, and this is kind of an overview of the area. Basically, all the streets out here now are about two lanes, 12 feet wide. Speed limit on H Street varies from 45 miles an hour, gets down to about 35 in here, and then in town it's down to 25. I think Odell is the only street that has right now curb gutter and sidewalk. Everybody else is about 2 foot shoulders. So what we did in 2007, we did the traffic analysis for this. The traffic analysis and the numbers are in your pamphlet for basically 1,000 homes. Okay? Now let me give you the number because it changed. Okay, so the number was based on 1,030 homes. Well, with the modifications that we did for the wetlands, we reduced it to 45 fewer single-family homes and 28 extra multifamily homes. The number is about the same, so we're talking about 1,000 homes that we're going to do that. With that comes a certain development, but it's not going to come all at once. Next one, please. So what we're planning on doing is we have 5 development phases. So this red area is development area 1. We're going to do this first. There are 400 homes associated with that. And then the second phase is the blue area here, this is with the commercial. Third phase is here. And then the fourth and the fifth phase, for the traffic study, we combine them together. There's only about 100 homes there. So just for the sake of the analysis, we combined those two. Now there are dates and numbers that are associated with the traffic study. It was done in 2007. We anticipated 2009 we'd start. It'd take about 7 years to do the first phase. Don't get too hung up on the numbers. The important thing to remember is that it's not going to happen at once, and there is a time lag. What we're shooting for is we're anticipating about 50 homes a year. And if things are good, we'll do more. If things are not so good, we'll do less. But kind of keep in mind, it's about a 20-year projection that we have for the development of this. Okay, I always keep doing this, but this is the next slide. But before I do that, I want to talk about what happens to these homes. We've got 1,000 homes, and where are the people going to go? So when we did this traffic analysis, we tried to figure out, okay, let's kind of imagine where are people going to go based on where are their jobs, where are the retail facilities, where are they going to go down to Seattle, they're going to go to Costco, so where are the other cities? So we kind of made this assumption that we said, okay, we're going to assume that about a sixth of the traffic is going to go to Linden. It's going to go eastbound on H Street towards Linden. We're going to say about a third of the traffic is going to go to Blaine. And then about half the traffic is going to go south towards Bellingham, where the Costco and the hospitals and other things are at. And that was kind of our starting point. The next thing we did was we actually did a road test. We went out there, and that's, please.
I'm sorry, there was no assumption of any traffic going north?
Not on 8th Street. You're going to take 8th Street to Blaine, and then you can go north.
The traffic going to Blaine didn't go on to Canada.
And then it'll go to Canada. That's correct, yeah. So we.
Sorry for that.
So what we did is we actually did a road test. We went out and we measured, okay, people are going to drive wherever it's the quickest, it's the shortest, whatever works the best. They're going to do that. So that's what we did too. We looked at 3 different routes. We said, okay, if you're at the site, you go to 8th Street, you get on I-5, and you come down. And our test point was right here. It's the overpass at Birch Bay Linden Road. Okay, we said, we're going to time everything to this. So the other way was, okay, if I'm right here, I could take Valley View, do a couple of jogs, and then get down this way. And then the last one was for the people that don't like to make turns. They're just going to do this, come down, and then they're done. I think we got the answers in your, or those things in your, but basically here's what happened is we found that this route on I-5 was actually fastest. It's 12 minutes, but it was 8.7 miles, which was the longest. The second route this way was the shortest, 6.7 miles, but it took a minute longer. And the third route took 15 minutes. Put all this together. And basically what we said, okay, if we're at the site, and make sure I get this number right, 58% of the traffic is going to go this way, and 42% of the traffic is going to go that way. They put it all together, and that's what we came up with. Next slide, please. How do you know that your traffic system is working? Okay, what do you do when a traffic analysis comes out? How does it work? Well, the way we do the sanity check is, it's called a level of service. And the city of Blaine says anything that's worse than a level of service D is no good. And what does that mean? Well, we have mostly uncontrolled. We don't have any lights at these intersections. So if somebody waits more than 35 seconds at an intersection, then they're waiting too long. So this becomes the criteria. Next slide, please. So we went out and we said, okay, we identified the key intersections we want to look at. Here, 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 Valley View, Harvey, Odell, okay, SR3. And then for the people coming down here on Sweet Road, we're going to look at that. So for the first phase of development, Okay, again, we've got 400 homes. Level of D is bad. What do we've got? Now I wish my son's grades were this good. We got A's and B's here. Okay? Everything is fine, that first phase of development. Second phase of development, we still have B's. We see a C here at Odell. We're still better than the class, that level D. The next one, please. Okay, we have phases 1, 2, and 3 are in. We've got 900 homes. We're doing fine, except right here. People on Valley View Road that are trying to go north, they hit 8th Street, and it's going to take them too long to make that right or left to get onto 8th Street. So we're stuck here. So what we're going to do is, next slide please, hopefully by this time the East Blaine traffic plan comes in. And what does that mean? Well, Motts Hill Parkway comes in. Comes across all the way through the site. It connects this northern area north of 8th Street, and it ties right into downtown with the existing streets. Then we have a series of other neighborhood collectors here and here that come together. So all of this kind of fits together. We anticipate that about 50% of the Grandis traffic is going to take this route up here. And then we take this and then we put a little jog in there, so now that road and Valley View are lined up. Now we've got full build out, we've got over 1,000 homes, the commercial area is in, but we still have a problem here. Now, the traffic study as well, the problem was Valley View people can't get on. If you make this a 4-way stop, that's all you need, and everything works out. So this, we have 1,000 homes, becomes like the intersections over here, where you've got traffic stops right there. So that allows people to take less than 35 seconds to get onto 8th Street. So again, just kind of give you a background on this, we submitted this plan in 2007. The city reviewed it. We revised it. The East Blaine Infrastructure Plan was based on this information. Earlier this year, an outside consultant reviewed it. So everybody's kind of on board that, yeah, there's not a lot, as Michael said too, there's not a lot of traffic on 8th Street now. With Motts Hill Parkway coming in here, that should take care of a lot of this growth. Okay? The next one, please, is utilities. This is a great area, but there's no utilities out there now, or very few. So I'll start first with the on-site. Typical problems that are encountered with when you put sewer system, with ranging topography. Basically, what we're going to end up with is a trunk line coming down the center of the site on Motts Hill Parkway. And then to capture the runoff or the sewer from these northern lights, we'll have another system that comes down here. We've got a deep area here where the sewer comes down, but then it ties together, and then it's going to follow this Motts Hill Parkway in a utility easement right in through here. Okay, the next slide, please. So again, this is per the East Blaine plan. Here's Grandis. It all comes together, comes through this easement in here. This red box is the city-owned property. So really, we just need to connect the dots here. This is East Maple Ridge. They're going to build this piece of sewer, and they're going to build this piece in that ties in with the rest of the system. So we get an easement in here. We build this. Next thing you know, you've got 1,000 homes that are contributing to the new treatment facility down there. Next one, please. Water is interesting because we do have a pipe, an existing pipeline that takes us to the front door, but unfortunately the pressure is too low. Gets water there, but it's not enough for fire flow and other things. So what we're going to do is we need to get a booster pump installed here. And then what we do is we'll boost the water, and then we build the first and the second development areas using that booster pump. However, by the time we get to development area 3, the ground's about 100 feet higher, and the booster pump isn't economical. And by the time we get 1,000 homes, we're going to need a little bit more. So right over here, we've designated an area for a reservoir. Once this is done, we complete the loop, going through this easement, and the water is taken care of. Next one, please. Electrical system. The yellow is the existing service out here of the city. Right here, this is all Puget Sound Energies. Okay. When we started the project, we had the option because these people have power here. What do we do with? Well, we talked with the city, and I think it's our common interest for us to go with the city power in this area. So as the city, next one please, John, they have a phase development. This is their first phase. It says summer of 2000 gets done, and then we bring the power out. It's interesting that there's this little notch in here, and with Mottsville Parkway coming through, that easement coming through, there's a potential for bringing the power in there and also staying off 8th Street. 8th Street's kind of, we don't want to restrict the traffic. If we can build off it just like the sewer, the better off we'll be. With the electrical, just the gas and the phone and cable, all is kind of the same thing. It needs to come with the electrical system. So there we go. I kind of tipped our hand. Dave's going to come back. He's going to tell you the fun stuff of what exactly we're going to be building out there. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Mike. The fun stuff, huh? Gosh, I don't know. Okay, so you've heard all the kind of the facts of the site here, and we needed to know all that information, all the input from the engineers, from the marketing, from economics, from the trends, all those things, and now we're having to put this on the ground. What we've done is create a whole series of design standards. In a planned residential community like this, we have the opportunity to do the right thing and create our own kind of zoning here that makes sense. Because a lot of regulations are done years ago and things change, and we want to have that flexibility. So I'm going to go through a lot of the design standards that we have submitted with this PUD, and a lot of the details are in the package. I'm not going to go over in great detail, but I'll describe them basically. And everything starts with the roads. We can't do anything unless we know what the road is. And of course, with low-impact development strategies is being foremost in our mind to protect the environment, having the least amount of impervious surface is paramount. So we want to find out what will move the traffic and what will do those still function as the best LID strategies. So Mike talked about this earlier, and Craig. This is the collector road. This is the Mottsville Parkway and the Grandis east and west access off H Street Road. Essentially you have a one-way going each way with a rain garden in between, just to add a lot of landscaping. So we're trying to avoid big open areas of asphalt, trying to have a more residential and country feel to it. Next slide. At the main intersections where Grandis Pond East and West come into the collector road, I think we've learned quite a bit that roundabouts actually do work and keep traffic moving, and it's a traffic calming feature, and we'd really like to utilize that at our major intersections. Next slide. The local access road, so no property fronts on a collector road. Nobody backs out onto a collector road, so everyone's kind of coming into those, so there's no going to be interrupting with people traffic backing out onto them. Everything's a small road. So we wanted to keep these as small as possible. So these are 28 feet wide, so parking's on one side. It was described earlier that when it's possible to infiltrate, we're going to have the road sloped to the side over to pervious paving where the parking area is. It'll also kind of make the road seem a little bit narrower here. The other thing we have here is because we're trying to get affordability here, so we want to have sizes of lots. We have about 50 by 100 foot lots. So generally what happens is, as these houses get smaller, but there's not the big gigantic yard, and what happens is, in the old days, the park was in your backyard. But now people need to have something more affordable, and they will walk to a pocket park. So we're going to have a lot of small little parks spread throughout the property that's close in, and have some friendliness to the property. So what's going to happen is we have 13 feet from the curb to the front of the house, and in that next 6 feet, we require that every house just is 1 story high, like a front porch. There's no 2-story highs there. You have to be back another 6 feet before you go with 2 stories. Next slide. Against the border, as we described earlier here, we have the 10-foot buffer required by the Boundary Commission against the border. We have a 6-foot high fence just to kind of keep balls from going out there. And then the roadway, which is a typical local access road, and then the private property over to the other side of the road. Next. In some cases where we have like less than 4 homes that are accessed, we want to keep that like a country lane. So we have 12-foot wide lane when you're only accessing 4 homes if that situation comes up. And in cases where there's an alley, like when we have these cottage homes on here, it's only 20 feet wide. We want to make sure that the parking is off of that, and we keep the road as low impact as possible. Next slide. A big part of this is walking. It's one of the biggest amenities in projects these days is people like walking on trails around the property. And so we're going to have a variety of kinds of trails. We're going to have hard 6-foot wide pavement next to the roads, but we're also going to have 4-foot wide trails in buffer areas, and we're going to have, in some cases, some raised walkways that are no more than 20, 30 inches above the ground that are over wetland areas, in some cases to get from upland to upland. Next slide. One thing that's mandated here, of course, is the post office wants these darn collector boxes. They won't go to each house anymore. And so every neighborhood, we have a place where there's like gang boxes of where the mail comes. But we want it to be kind of an interesting gathering place. So what'll happen is we got transit coming in, so every neighborhood, so if you're coming along the main collector road on the left here, and you're turning into your neighborhood, right in this corner, about the equivalent of a 50 by 100 foot lot, will be kind of your neighborhood pocket park. What'll happen is there'll be a pull-off here for buses, for school buses, for transit, when there's enough people out here for WTA to go out here. And then there's kind of a little park atmosphere, and then there'll be the mailboxes here in a pull-off area for people to come off, get their mail on their way home. So it's just kind of a simple place to go. You may meet your neighbors here. It's trying to celebrate and create a place that's usually just this dumb kiosk as you enter a neighborhood. Next slide. There'll be a lot of cases, as you see the overall master plan, where there's pocket parks and linear parks that provide connectivity between neighborhoods. So these are just going to have some natural landscaping, some ornamental landscaping, some playground equipment, and some different elements that we've included. Next slide. In this pocket park area that is in that beginning of each neighborhood, there'll be standards for a bus shelter, the mail shelter, and of course sitting and the mail itself, and having some shelter over it. So you come in there, if it's pouring rain, at least you're not getting soaked while you're pulling your mail out or while you're waiting for the bus, and have some design consistency to these structures. Next slide. In these pocket parks, linear parks, there are going to be a lot of different kinds of elements. There'll be playground equipment, there'll be fountains, there'll be natural landscaping, seating. In some cases where we have big areas, we'll want a small softball area, and even maybe some half-court basketball if the residents, depending on the makeup of the neighborhood. Next slide. A lot of this, as you know, half of this property is passive open space. So this just shows clearly that what kind of treatment happens, that trails can happen in the buffer areas, but not in the wetlands that are over here on the left. And in some cases, if there's a drop-off, there'll be different kinds of fences that we have in other part of the standards. Next. The typical single-family lot will be a typical 50 by 100 foot lot. And what we're going to do is we're trying to create a sense of neighborhood here that follows the standards of the traditional neighborhood development trends and the Congress for New Urbanism, where you don't go down a neighborhood and say, welcome to my garage. It's just a row of garages. So in this case, because we only have parking on one side also, all garages are going to require to be back 40 feet. So all you see is the front porch, the front of the house, just like in a traditional neighborhood. You see the front of the house. Welcome. You know exactly where to go. Where's the front door? You don't have to hunt it. It's not hidden behind the garage. And in a lot of cases, we'll have this paving situation where just the wheels go on it, and we have green space in between. This allows a couple cars to park off street in addition to the garage. The garage could be on the side. It could be behind like a carriage house, or it could be behind the house here. So there's a lot of different kinds of configurations. We want a lot of flexibility and those kinds of things. The setbacks, the side yards are all conforming to the regular Blaine Municipal Code. Next. On all these single-family developments, we have a maximum 30-foot height. We met with the fire marshal, determined that that's really kind of the maximum they like for firefighting, because in fact they bring their, as soon as you go over 30 feet, you need a wider road, and we really didn't want wider roads because of the ladder truck. But in some cases, when they do bring the ladder truck, it actually, we went out and measured it, and where their outriggers go out, they need 27 feet instead of 20 feet. But we have driveways about every 50 feet, and it just worked out that their outriggers would fit right where a driveway is. So it wasn't a problem. because we had enough open space between where cars were parked. So all the homes will be 30 feet high. You can see this very front portion here at 6 feet would have just a one-story element to kind of bring the scale down closer to where people are. Next. Now, in a part of the property, we have cottage home lots. You may have seen this trend around the country. It's almost like a condominium size, 700 to 1,000 square foot home. It's not a condo, it's a house, and it's just a cute little house. And so what happens is a lot of these lots are 45 by 75 or 35 by 75, depending whether there's an alley behind it or not, but they're also open onto a commons area. So there's this sense of a lot of open space, but it gets a different type of product in for people who want just a 1 or 2 bedroom house. Now what happens, next slide, is in order to maintain the cuteness and the smallness of these things, if there's a second floor, it has to be in a dormer design. It has to be in a dormer. So what ends up happening is the roof just goes from the first floor up, and then there's dormers within that. So a lot of times on a regular single-family house, it'll be probably 2 flat stories and then a roof up here. But this will feel like a 1-story house with upstairs, kind of like the old-fashioned houses. I mean, house I had in Seattle was 800 square feet, and it was this cute little Tudor. And that's probably a trend that's going to come back. Not that style, but the size. For affordability is one fact. Next slide. Another thing will be happening is the what used to be called duplexes are now called paired homes. And so what happens here is we're going to force paired homes to actually share common driveways so we don't have so many driveways out on the street. So what'll happen is the garage will be up behind it, and you'll have, instead of what looks like a mirror image, it'll look like a single house. And then there'll be one driveway in between, and then you go into the garages behind the home. There's just a small area where we allow these kinds of homes, but it gives another type of housing type. Next slide. In the Grandis Pond East area, we have a small multifamily area. It's about 128 units there. In this case, we also have 30-foot maximum height, and we have some standards that we want a lot of pedestrian connectivity from the unit to the road to where if there is any commercial or out to public trails, and they would always face out onto open space. And because we have so much open space, it's relatively easy to do, but we have kind of a layout how that works best with the parking. Now, part of this thing that's important is how much we're dedicating to this. Next slide. Very important issue here is parking. Unfortunately, you know, when you're doing master plans, they're mainly parking plans, and you kind of fit everything else around it. But parking is a very big deal. And what happens here in the city of Blaine, the standard is 8.5 by 19 for a full-size car and 8.5 by 15 for a compact style. The trend nationally is going to an average medium-sized car. You know, what's really amazing is the car companies, they produce the same cars all over the United States, and every city has a different standard. How for a parking stall? Isn't that bizarre? Well, what happens here is in a lot of cases, when the stall is too small, people park over on the line, and all of a sudden you've lost a stall. This happens a lot. And the trend here is you'll see, actually I wanted to read something here about parking. You know, parking, it's a substantial land use, considering it's an accessory function to other uses. Exploring means of reducing parking standards, increasing its efficiency, and minimizing its overwhelming presence is key to creating a vibrant, pedestrian-oriented urbanism that's attractive, inviting, and interactive. The 8.5-foot standard is more of a compact stall width and lacks efficient usability. The national downsizing of a car since 2006, most are really 15 feet deep. There's a national trend to create medium-sized stalls. A single standard for full and compact-sized stalls adds design flexibility and better land usage. So what I've got here, these are some average sizes that different cities are starting to move to around the country. The existing we've got here is 8.5 by 19 for a full-size stall, 8.5 by 16 for a compact. So there's 20% in non-residential can be compact and 33% in residential can be compact. We're proposing that we have a 9-foot wide stall with a 17-foot depth and a 22-foot aisle with no compacts allowed at all. This ends up being about an average or a little greater than average of what different cities are doing around the country. What happens is when you've got an extra wide stall is you can imagine when your stall is skinny, you're backing out and you start to turn the wheel, but because it's skinny, you can't start turning it till you're almost out of the stall. This happens a lot in parking garages where the column's way out at the end. Well, if it's wider, you can start turning sooner and get out of the stall. Now, I wouldn't recommend this necessarily if you've got grocery stores where you got a lot of in and out traffic and you have grocery carts coming in. But in the situation where you got multifamily, people are parked for a long period of time, or a small neighborhood commercial, it seems like a reasonable thing to do, and this is what's happening around the country, and it gets a better usage of land and a better usage of parking because we're not using the compacts. You have all this empty stalls. So what happens is smaller stalls are more accessible for residential and small commercial, as I mentioned. Due to the convergence of vehicle sizes, compacts are no longer a rational parking design alternative. A rational approach is one size fits all. Now, requiring excessively generous parking geometrics wastes resources, land, and money, and conflicts with other community interests, such as increased green space and reduced stormwater runoff. And that's what we'd like to propose here, is to change the standard at Grandis Pond only. Next slide. Now, in the commercial site, this is the only places really we have this parking standards is the multifamily and the commercial area. In the commercial area, what we wanted to make sure we were important is we have a lot of connectivity to trails, to other buildings. Now, you know, we have a small commercial area. There could be potentially 20,000 square feet, but realistically, it's a market demand issue, and it probably won't happen till it's all built out. Now, you can imagine how things will change if gasoline is $100 a gallon. People are going to want to walk to their neighborhood store. If it's, you know, just running on air, they might not. So there'll be a lot of changes. What kind of uses will be there? Community uses? Will there be neighborhood uses? There's a lot of trends in some communities, in other big master plan communities. The amenity is actually providing small hardware or staples or sundries instead of an athletic club. And as people develop this thing, as they find out what the demographics want, they'll look at those kinds of things. Next slide. In the commercial area, this is also maximum 30 foot to meet some fire marshal requirements. It also has the flexibility to allow a second floor with residential. So there could be live-work, could be residential above, that's just not live-work. But it allows that flexibility for another kind of housing type that'll change over time. Next slide. Signage and wayfinding. We are integrating with the City of Blaine's numbering system and kind of the numbering system out from the city core and the names on the numbers, and then we have other names for properties that are north-south. And then we have signage on the site that's going to be consistent, so it's easy to find your way around. The numbering system will help that, and the signage will be consistent around that. So we'll have some interpretive signage if there's some interesting on-site environmental issues, safety signage, directional signage, neighborhood identification, and of course the major project entry, kind of very low scale. Next slide. Lighting is a very important issue too. We adhere to what's called the dark sky standards, where we don't want to light the world, we want to just light where you're walking or where you're driving. It's important, and especially talking with public safety officials, to see the effect of lights and not the source of light. So you want to illuminate things, not have a glare in your eyes. So what happens here with the lighting, we just want to light on outdoor lighting, street lights, light the driving area and have an alternative, so we're just not overlighting area. Next slide. Next slide. We have a little bit of do's and don'ts too. Up in the upper left here on walkway lights, we do not want to create glare. We don't want to have lights coming up in people. What happens is when you see glare like this, I mean, it's just the worst. You can't see anything around you. And we don't want this where the street lights are shining lights into the house. How many times have you seen that? We want to make sure there's shielding on the lights to prevent that from happening. And in lighting on trails, we want a continuous row and not just random, so you know which direction to go. And so again, here on the street lights, we want to make sure they're shielded so all the light is headed down. Next slide. We have a lot of landscape buffers around this property here. Around the interior property, there's a 30-foot minimum buffer to any houses and a 20-foot natural landscape buffer around the perimeter of the property. At H Street, we've maintained a 50-foot landscape buffer. So you really don't going to see this very much from H Street at all. And it's pretty much keeping a lot of the natural conifers that are on that street there now. It's about 50 feet. There'll be various kinds of fences. There's not going to be any chain link. There'll be natural or stone or wood fences, no higher than 6 feet. And in some cases where the grade drops more than 30 inches, we may have some small guardrails to wetlands if there's any grade drops like that. Next slide. Phasing. Now, as Mike mentioned earlier, this is a 20-year project, so there's about 50 homes per year. We're not going to get 1,013 on here all at once. It's going to happen slowly over time, and it's going to be a market-driven product to a certain extent. Now, what happens here is the first development phase actually consists of 7 neighborhoods. And of course, all of this, of course, is contingent on implementation of the approved East Bland infrastructure plan for access via the Motts Hill easement area. So that's all a given. But given this on this first development phase, now they call this the first phase, but in fact it's 7 neighborhoods. So, for example, Lady Fern, right here at the beginning, here's H Street down here on the bottom, and here's the first Grandis Park Road coming in here to the Motts Hill Parkway. So this first phase, Lady Fern, is only 70 homes. Hawthorne is 50 homes. Twinberry, where's Twinberry? Right there. This is 737 homes. Foxglove is 19. Dogwood, which are the cottage homes in here, it's about 72 cottage homes. Engelman has 60, Cottonwood 93. This is all part of the first preliminary plat, too, that's also being submitted. So this is a total of 403 homes. So this is about 8 years. This is about 8 years of development. So when they say it's first phase, it's really 8 years of time, if you have an average of about 50 homes a year. Next slide. So the second development phase has about 4 neighborhoods. 1, 2, 3, 4. This has the commercial, the multifamily, and single family on here. This is a grand total of about 248 homes. That could take 5 years. Next slide. The third development phase, this has 1, 2, 3, 4 neighborhoods. It's only about 252 homes, and that's another 5 years. Next slide. Development area 4 only has 30 homes. That's maybe 6 months if you use the average of 50 per year. Development area next. The last development area 5 has 2 neighborhoods, and it's about 80 homes, as in 1.5 years. So it's a grand total of 20 years over a period of time. Now, there's a couple other development areas. There's this area right here near Grandis Pond East. That's kind of designated as a public safety area. So as demand occurs, we reserve that area for maybe a small fire station or public safety or something can go in that part. And another development area, of course, is the Grandis Pond area. That's all open space. By the way, the names here that you may wonder about. We have tried and tried to find somebody who knew a name for this pond. We could not find anyone, and we searched everywhere. And so what happened is we're kind of going to be naming things here. So we looked at the original habitat and wetland plant study on the site. That was the mantra for what the names became, because most of the Latin names have Grandis as a descriptor, and that became kind of the overall overriding theme for the property, and that became Grandis Pond. That's where that name comes from. And then all these other names here for these neighborhoods are all names of plants that are found on the site. So it's like there's a reason to do something. It's not just random. So in summary, I just want to make it sure you understand that this master plan is very important on how we've taken all these factors into account. And when you plan like this, as you know, the old saw, those who fail to plan to fail. And we don't want that to happen here. So as we mentioned earlier, the Grandis Pond PUD project site lies within the city of Blaine. It's the East Blaine neighborhood, the planned residential zone, and the intent of this zone, as indicated in the Blaine Municipal Code, is to promote an orderly transition from rural to residential development. In addition, It is the intent of this zone to provide the opportunity for the development of building sites which will maximize the efficient use of both energy and land use by allowing an option for clustering of residential lots, which is what we've done here. This project has approximately 3.7 dwelling units per acre of net upland development. It's only 2 dwelling units overall. It's kind of the most we could get on here is reasonable, what the market was saying would be reasonable here. The Blaine Municipal Code further states that it should provide a flexibility of residential unit types, density, and mix in order to provide major open space systems and to retain the wetlands, streams, aquifer recharge areas, and wildlife habitat corridors in a natural estate as possible. The zone requires the preparation of a planned unit development to achieve the flexibility of residential and commercial uses and to provide a guide to phasing any future project. This project started, as Steve mentioned here, over 5 years ago. We've listened to the neighbors, the city, the land, and the marketplace. It conforms to all, we've met with staff, we've conformed to all the technical review committee recommendations. A master plan development like this locks in an environmentally sensitive and appropriate development pattern for the future. We believe this master plan achieves the goals for all interested stakeholders and look forward to its approval by doing the right thing. Thank you.
In the drawing or the sketches of the height and so forth, on one side of the street it showed covered parking. On the other side, opposite side, there was no covered parking. Is there going to be any covered parking in the multifamily units?
Yes and no.
Yes. That's what I got.
This is going to be a market, it's not going to be required. It's not going to be required. So I showed it there, what would happen. I recommend it. I mean, it's a trend now because a lot of people have very expensive cars and they like it, but it's not a requirement there. We're just showing that when it would occur, this is what it could look like, but it's not a requirement.
Then,
Marketing.
was that?
Marketing on it.
There, exactly, there you go.
Could I
That's
ask
right.
Mr. Christensen, the location of the public service area,
Yep,
is that right on H Street?
it is. It's right on the corner of H Street and Grandis Pond East. It's right fronting on H Street.
Rather than being within the development itself?
Well, when we talked to public safety, they wanted the ability to go both directions. They wanted, because they're going to serve more than just this project. They're going to go, west end on H Street, so they wanted the ability to go to both.
Okay.
That's where they like to be.
Richard?
Yeah, if it's not within the scope, you can just go ahead and inform me there. You know, I've seen places that when they were built in 1960 or 1970 were veritable palaces and paradises, and now they're slums. And so it's always good to think of several decades ahead. And when I'm hearing things like fountains and mail shelters and major roads going through, and then and there's that aspect of the condo-style cottaging. I'm wondering what kind of format there is here for maintenance. Will the residents of this whole area have their own strata fees, or is the idea that the city is going to be maintaining the major roads going through there? Something like a fountain or the mail shelter, is that something that's just eventually going to become dilapidated, and whose responsibility will it be 25 years from now to keep those kinds of things maintained? Who's going to be paying for that?
I'll just answer there. Yes, there will be a homeowners association that will take care of. There'll be quite a bit of common areas here. There's going to be the open space areas. There's going to be the roads that are private, in addition to the common area parks. If it doesn't become a city park, it will be an HOA responsibility.
So like a mandatory fee that
Yes.
would be alienable if somebody didn't pay
I
it?
think that we have information in that in the CCNRs we've submitted.
Great.
And just to clarify, the majority of the roads are public roads, but as Dave pointed out, there are some private roads that would then be maintained by the homeowners association. But for instance, unlike Semiahmoo, this project would have the majority of the roads as public roads.
Does the city have any way of enforcing that association continues to exist and does its job?
Yes,
Okay, great.
yes, this, through the CCNRs.
Okay.
And if they're not written in that, specific of a way now, they can be. The city has the ability to be a party to the CCNRs.
And the city has experience with this most recently with East Maple Ridge. We have the exact same sort of situation, and so we've seen this happen in a number of projects. Dennis?
Dave, on the use of narrow roads as a low-impact development strategy, is there any difference in the amount of pollutants from the cars just because you put in a narrow road?
Yes, there is. I don't know, Mike,
I think the biggest concern is just the impervious area. You reduce the impervious area so that when the rain hits it, you're not collecting more water, you're not treating more water. Smaller road, it just goes right into the grass or plants that are there.
the more land you cover, the worse it is. And then when you're doing calculations, you want the water to go down into the ground, and when you're not letting that happen, you've got to collect it and distribute it. So, the smaller it is, the better.
Other questions? All right, seeing none then, unless staff has some